Hey everyone, I just finished the brand new book Disarming Leviathan by Caleb Campbell. It's put out by IVP. I want to say thanks to IVP, first of all, for sending me a copy of this for review. This is my honest take on the book. And I wanted to also get this review out. This book actually comes out this week, the week of July 4th as I'm recording this. It's a very fitting time for it to come out, given the themes on it. But let me take you through my typical format of the main idea of this project, the research behind it, the readability of its style, and then some of my reactions to it. Let's jump in. The main idea of Disarming Leviathan is it's a book about Christian nationalism, which is being widely written about right now and responded to right now in lots of different ways. It does have at least in my reading and my kind of take on the literature right now, it has a pretty specific angle, which is to approach Christian nationalism as a mission field, or kind of to have a missiological perspective on reaching people who are caught up in deep Christian nationalist thinking, or that kind of movement, that kind of hyper-nationalistic, patriotic movement. At least in America, it's predominantly on the right at the moment as of recording this. So Disarming Leviathan is from someone who is a pastor in contexts that have been deeply affected by this movement, and it's a diagnosis of the movement. It's some writing about some of the underpinnings of it, but it's also very explicitly aimed at how do you reach people caught up in it and think like from the angle of thinking of yourself as a missionary to almost to like an unreached people group is kind of the lens that the book uses. So which is I think fair to say it's a pretty distinct way to get at that topic, at least as it's being written about right now in a lot of circles. So that's what Disarming Leviathan is about. That's kind of the intent of the book. Now the research behind it's not long. If you saw when I held it up, it's not a long book. I would say, given the weight of the book, not the literal weight, but like the kind of heft to the writing, which I'll get to that in a second, but given kind of the fact that it is more popular level, it's a surprisingly well-researched book in the sense of the width, the breadth of the research. So there's a lot of sociology. He pulls on sociological writings, notably Whitehead and Samuel Perry are big ones who've been writing about Christian nationalism right now, but it goes way beyond them in terms of the sociological sources that he pulls on. He also did some like first-hand research where he quotes people that he spoke with. He pulls quotations from interviews and events and conferences that he attended himself, like Turning Point USA and such. There's a good bit of kind of journalistic style research where he's quoting news events, news articles. There's some historical research where he pulls on people like Mark Knoll, who have done some like historical work on American religious practice and patriotism as it intersects with American faith and religion in America and such. So he really pulls on a pretty wide assortment of sources. And it's because the book moves through kind of sociology to missiology to historical snapshots to some really practical diagnoses of things that are happening right now. So it is a lot of those things combined. And I think that's like for the kind of style that it's in and the weight of it academically, it's more than well researched for kind of this type of book that it is, if that makes sense. So that was I thought a positive thing. And then now the style, I've hinted at this a little bit. This is a very easy book to read. It's written to be easily read. It's not written to be a it's not written to be a like deeply academic expose of Christian nationalist philosophy or something like that. It's not. There are some chapters on that kind of where he's trying to get at some of the philosophical kind of underpinnings or like the attraction to Christian nationalist way of thinking, but it's not a like sociological textbook. It's not super hyper focused on any one of those areas I just talked about in the research, sociology, journalism, history. It's not super focused on any one of those. It's wider, or it's like a bit wider than that. So what I'm trying to say, I'm like rambling around this. What I'm trying to say is that it's well written. It moves like in the sense that it's easy to read. It's accessible. It moves through lots of different topics. And I think here's probably the biggest thing to say about the readability of it. It's very practical. I'll say more about this in a reaction in a minute, but it's extraordinarily practical to the extent that some people might not really like it. Like if you just want to read a text, but one of the last chapters is a like hyper practical. here's how to approach a conversation with somebody caught up in these ways of thinking, to the point where it like breaks down, here's certain likely lines that someone's going to say, here are possible ways you can respond, here's a way to check yourself as you're thinking and your own attitude towards this idea. And it literally breaks it out in like that. It's like a workbook almost, is that chapter in particular. So it's so practical, which I think some people will love and some people will bounce off of, depending on your style and what kind of book you are. I guess I'm saying that just to know that that's in there. If that's something that is compelling to you or off-putting to you, your mileage is going to vary on that. But so practical. It's written to be accessible. It's written with, I would say, like a pastoral heart, not to be inaccessible or like super ivory tower approach to this whole topic, because he's explicitly trying to help people really interact well with people that they disagree with. So super accessible. I think I made that point enough at this point in the review. Okay, so let me move on to my overarching reactions. There's a couple things I want to say about this book, which I appreciated. I appreciated it very much. I'm not so sure that I'm the kind of person that this book is aimed at. But I'm trying to picture the kind of people this book is aimed at, and I think I really appreciate it for what he's doing and the uniqueness with which he's kind of doing it. So what I mean by that, let me unpack that a little bit. First of all, the thing I started this review off by saying was that it is a unique angle. It's a distinct way to get at this topic, that missiological reaching an unreached people group angle. I think that's very interesting. I appreciate that he's like very upfront about it from the very beginning. One thing I wonder is, first of all, this book is not a book for Christian nationalists. It's a book for people trying to connect with Christian nationalists. And I think that's important, because I could imagine someone who's really deep in the Christian nationalist kind of thing reading this and being very almost like offended that this book kind of assumes that they are co-opted by a movement that's not Christian, actually. In the sense that this book is saying, like, this is an unreached people group that we need to actually reach. And then someone within that people group might find that condescending or off-putting or something. So that should be a known thing going into this book, that I think it's fair to say it's not for people in the movement. It's for people who are trying to understand or connect with or even empathize with people in the movement. That all said, he does a great job at being reflective and intellectually humble, in the sense of saying, like, if you don't understand the people caught up in this movement, here is a kind of painstaking way to like get into the psychology of how powerful this movement is for people, how it provides really like potent promises of security. There's a spiritual power to it. I thought it was one of my favorite chapters, was kind of the spiritual power to things like nationalistic movements in our time. And so he really encourages self-reflection and deep empathy, checking your own biases and your own arrogance in your interactions with people. In a lot of ways, this book boils down to kind of a how to have uncomfortable conversations with someone and getting into the psychology of empathy and connection, and humility and all of that. But all under the broader theme of this is specifically about how to connect with someone who's really swept up in the Christian nationalist way of thinking. It's not about winning arguments. He does get a little bit into here. There's a chapter on the emptiness kind of Christian nationalism. So he does get into refuting some of the conspiratorial thinking and like providing, like, he in this book provides solid, factual, clear-headed reasoning on why some of this stuff is empty intellectually or like in terms of the promises it upholds. But the book is not primarily about refuting that stuff. It's more about equipping someone to engage well with other people. And so to that end, I think it occupies a unique kind of slot on the bookshelf, so to speak, right now. I think that it's in its practicality, in its pretty wide breadth of research, in its like kind of intellectual posture. All those things are refreshing about it. And one of the reasons I was curious about it is I do a decent amount of reading on the kind of political background of American and religious faith practice in our history, and I'm so very interested in this moment that we're in culturally. And I wanted to read this book to see if it did something different, and I think actually it does, even if it's not something that necessarily, was for me in particular, just in the sense that I've done a lot of reading on the other subfields he gets into, like psychology and connection, and, Jonathan Haidt's book, The Righteous Mind, gets into a lot of this stuff at way more academic depth and rigor. So some of that stuff, if you've already swam in those waters, so to speak, for a long time, this book's not necessarily going to give you anything new. But in the way it's distilled, in the way it's presented, in that unique angle he gets at, and then in the incredibly extraordinarily practical kind of outworking of it at the end, it does something distinct and interesting and unique that really merits, it merits a read if that is something that sounds helpful to you, and particularly if you're someone who's, I don't know, a member of a faith community or a leader, or you just have family members and friends who you just cannot connect with, and you have like been banging your head on the wall of trying to have a better conversation. I actually think this book might be exactly helpful for you. And so that's part of the reason I wanted to put this review together. So I wanted to give people a good sense of what this book is, what it isn't, and then if it might be something that you might find helpful. I think it's going to help a lot of people, honestly, in this particular time. So I'm really glad it exists. I'm glad that he took the angle he took, and the perspective that he's coming from is really, really meritorious one. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Disarming Leviathan by Caleb Campbell, put out by IVP on this week of July 4th, 2024. Thanks as always for taking some time to watch.